recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on Friday, I flew with President Trump to Tennessee to visit with the Tennesseans who were hurt by the tornadoes last week. There were 4 of those tornadoes. They hit primarily Benton, Davidson, Wilson, and Putnam County. They left 25 dead, 150 injured. There were more than 1,000 structures that were damaged. The winds were up to 176 miles per hour in the tornado that reached Putnam County. We visited western Putnam County, not far from Baxter. I talked to Matt and Angela Struggs there. She told me that at about 2 a.m., I guess it's early Wednesday morning, she heard what sounded like a freight train and then a whistle. All the people I talked with heard a freight train and a whistle. She said of course, they were all asleep. It was 2 a.m. in the morning, and they didn't have any warning. So she ran upstairs as the windows were being blown out of her house, grabbed her youngest child, came back downstairs where her other 2 children were, and her husband, and the sound was gone. They opened the door and looked across the street, and her son said, "It's gone." What was gone was all the homes, all the neighbors. 9 died in that neighborhood alone. The first heroes of this tragedy were those neighbors and other neighbors in Nashville, in Benton County, in Mount Juliet and Wilson County. Matt Struggs, the husband of the young woman that I was talking with, is a worship leader in their church. This was obviously a very close-knit community. He said, "We knew who was left by the sounds of their voices. And so we set about finding them and digging them out and getting them to the hospital." This is certainly not what anyone would describe as an area of rich Americans, but they would not want to be described either as middle-income or low-income Americans. They were what I would call salt of the earth people, really good people, very close-knit community whose first reaction and whose reaction the day we were there, 3 days later, was how can we help each other? After the neighbors, the next heroes were the first responders. We met with many of them in Cookeville. Next were the volunteers. They turned out by the hundreds. Rick Gilbert, who is disaster coordinator for the Church of Christ in downtown Cookeville, talked to me about what they had there, but he didn't have to tell me. I could see it. It was stacked high with boxes, almost everything imaginable that someone could want. Whatever they needed, he said, is what we try to give people who come here. These Tennesseans were very grateful for the visit by President Trump. It was more than the fact that this was the first time any president of the United States had visited Cookeville, Tennessee. This is an important town, but it's a town between Nashville and Knoxville, about nearly halfway. And presidents come to Knoxville or Nashville or Memphis or Chattanooga or our bigger cities when they come to Tennessee. But not only did the president go to Cookeville, that was a 40-minute helicopter flight. He drove another 30 or 40 minutes to this neighborhood where the Struggs and their neighbors lived, the ones who had opened the door and looked across the street and seen that everything was gone. The president stayed and he talked for a long time, and he listened, and they appreciated it very much. He and the other federal officials announced a declaration in record time. So by the time we were there on Friday, there were 75 federal emergency management personnel on the ground in Tennessee, and there were 6 shelters already open. I just talked with Congressman Jim Cupper from Nashville, who's been deeply involved with this since the beginning, and he talked about the shelters being opened and the devastation that the Tennessee state agriculture center there in Nashville. Governor Bill Lee and his wife Maria were there, and he did, as usual, a remarkably good job. He, like the president, have an easy way of dealing with people. Congressman John Rose was there. His hometown is Cookeville, the community where we were visiting. Senator Blackburn was there. She had gone with Congressman Rose on Wednesday and Thursday as soon as she heard about it, so she went back on Friday with us. And of course, the mayors of all those communities hadn't gotten much sleep since Tuesday night and the tragedy occurred. They and we, they know, and the president and the governor and I and Senator Blackburn, we all said to them, we know we can't resolve this. We can't make things like they used to be. We know we can't give you all the help that you need, but we're here. And that's really all they expected or all they wanted. This is not our first tornado in Tennessee. We've had, according to the Tennessean newspaper, we've had 18 in the last 25 years. And several of them have been strong tornadoes, like this one. But the people of Tennessee would want me to express our heartfelt appreciation to the president and to the federal officials who, in the midst of everything else they had to do, jumped on this tragedy immediately, got the declaration out quickly, had the FEMA personnel on site, and had the shelters open in what seemed to me to be a record amount of time. And they then joined with the Tennessee volunteers and the neighbors and the first responders who set out to help the Tennesseans who were hurt. There was a beautiful article written this morning that appeared in the New York Times by Margaret Renkl from Nashville about the meaning of Nashville Strong, in which she talks about, in her last sentence is, and while we understand we have not been singled out by God for survival, we also understand that we can be God's hands here in the rubble, helping our neighbors dig out. That's what's happening in Tennessee, and the president and the federal officials and the others who went to help, we greatly appreciate what they did, and I wanted to come to the floor and say that. I thank the president, and I yield the floor.